For more than 40 years, Germany was not one country, but two rival states standing on opposite sides of the Cold War. In the West was the Federal Republic of Germany, tied to the United States, Britain, France, and the capitalist world. In the East was the German Democratic Republic, usually called East Germany, aligned with the Soviet Union and governed by a ruling Socialist Party. East Germany presented itself as a workers' and peasants' state, a new anti-fascist Germany built from the ruins of the Second World War. But to many historians, it was an authoritarian Soviet satellite, held together by party control, a planned economy, and one of the most fortified borders in modern Europe. Its story is not just about ideology. It is about occupation, fear, ambition, migration, protest, and the sudden collapse of a state that once seemed permanent. East Germany's origins were rooted in defeat. In 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered, and the victorious Allied powers abolished German sovereignty through the post-war occupation system. The country was divided into zones controlled by the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. The Soviet-occupied zone covered much of what would become East Germany, bordered in the east by the Oder-Neisse Line, the new frontier with Poland. The Potsdam Agreement shaped this arrangement, setting the framework for occupation, reparations, and Germany's uncertain future. At first, the division of Germany was not necessarily meant to be permanent. But as relations between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union deteriorated, the occupation zones became political laboratories. Each side began rebuilding Germany according to its own model, and the Soviet zone moved toward a socialist system under Moscow's influence. A crucial step came in 1946 with the creation of the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, known by its German initials, SED. It was formed through a forced merger of the Communist Party and the Social Democratic Party in the Soviet zone. On paper, this created unity among left-wing forces. In practice, it eliminated independent social democracy and gave communists a dominant role in political life. When the German Democratic Republic was officially founded on October 7, 1949, the SED became the central force of the new state. East Germany had parties, elections, mass organizations, and official institutions, but real power rested with the SED leadership. The state was designed around the idea that the party represented the historical interests of workers and peasants. Opposition was treated not simply as disagreement, but as a threat to socialism itself. East Germany also defined itself differently from West Germany. The Western state, the Federal Republic, generally claimed continuity with German statehood and eventually saw itself as the legitimate democratic Germany. The GDR rejected the idea that it was the successor to the old German Reich of 1871 to 1945. Instead, it claimed to be a completely new anti-fascist state, purified of militarism and capitalism. This distinction mattered because both German states competed for legitimacy. For years, the official language of the GDR still included the goal of German unity under socialist conditions. But in 1974, East Germany removed the goal of reunification from its constitution. This was a major symbolic shift. The GDR no longer presented itself as a temporary half of a divided nation, but as a separate socialist German state with its own identity and future. Geography made East Germany unusual and vulnerable. It bordered the Baltic Sea in the north, Poland in the east, Czechoslovakia in the southeast, and West Germany along a long internal German frontier. Inside its territory sat Berlin, the former capital of Germany, itself divided into occupation sectors. East Berlin, the Soviet sector, became the de facto capital of the GDR. West Berlin, controlled by the United States, Britain, and France, remained politically tied to West Germany, even though it was surrounded by East German territory. This created a Cold War island deep inside the socialist bloc. For East German leaders, West Berlin was a constant embarrassment and danger. It was a visible alternative system, close enough to see, hear, visit, and, for many years, escape through. The geography of Berlin turned politics into a daily physical reality. Economically, the GDR followed the Soviet model, central planning, state ownership, production targets, and heavy political control over industry. Private enterprise was reduced, and the state directed resources according to plans rather than market demand. East Germany also had to pay substantial reparations to the Soviet Union after the war, which drained resources during the early years. Yet compared with other Eastern Bloc economies, the GDR became relatively successful. It had a skilled workforce, industrial traditions, and a strong base in chemicals, machinery, optics, and manufacturing. In official propaganda, this success proved the strength of socialism. But the economy still suffered from chronic shortages, limited consumer choice, inefficiency, and political interference. The contrast with the wealthier West German economy became increasingly difficult to hide, especially because many East Germans could compare their lives with relatives, broadcasts, and images from the other side. One of the GDR's greatest problems was emigration. Millions of people left the Soviet zone and later East Germany for the West, especially before the Berlin Wall was built. Many were young, educated, and professionally trained engineers, doctors, students, skilled workers, and intellectuals. This was not only a political embarrassment, but an economic crisis. A state that claimed to represent the future was losing the very people needed to build that future. The leadership described many emigrants as traitors or victims of Western manipulation, but the deeper issue was obvious: people were voting with their feet. They sought higher wages, more freedom, better consumer goods, and escape from political surveillance. For the GDR, every departure weakened the economy and questioned the legitimacy of the system. The open border in Berlin became the most urgent leak in the socialist state. In August 1961, the East German government, backed by the Soviet Union, closed that leak by building the Berlin Wall. Officially, it was called an anti-fascist protective barrier, supposedly built to defend East Germany from Western spies and aggression. In reality, its main function was to prevent East Germans from leaving. What began as barbed wire and roadblocks became a heavily fortified border system: concrete walls, guard towers, patrols, alarm wires, floodlights, dogs, and a deadly strip of controlled land. The inner German border between East and West Germany was also reinforced. Some escape routes were mined or booby-trapped. Many people who tried to flee were arrested, injured, or killed by border guards. The wall did stabilize the GDR by stopping mass emigration, but it also became the ultimate symbol of a state that had to imprison its own citizens to survive. Behind the wall, daily life in East Germany was complex. It was not only fear and repression. Many citizens had jobs, housing, education, childcare, sports clubs, cultural life, and a sense of community. The state invested heavily in social programs and presented itself as more equal and secure than capitalist societies. But these benefits came with limits. The ruling party controlled the press, schools, political debate, and public organizations. Dissent could bring consequences at work, in education, or through police attention. The security apparatus monitored society, encouraging informants and tracking suspected opponents. This produced a culture of caution, where private opinions and public statements often differed. East Germany promised security and social equality, but demanded loyalty and conformity. For some citizens, it offered stability; for others, it felt like a carefully managed cage. By the 1980s, the pressures on East Germany were growing. The economy struggled to keep up with Western living standards and technological change. The Soviet Union under Mikhail Gorbachev introduced reforms known as glasnost and perestroika, encouraging openness and restructuring, but the East German leadership resisted similar change. At the same time, civil society groups, churches, peace activists, environmentalists, and reform-minded citizens created spaces for criticism. Internationally, the Eastern Bloc was weakening. Hungary began opening its border with Austria, giving East Germans a new route to the west. Thousands fled through neighboring countries. The message was devastating for the GDR: if people could not leave through Berlin, they would find another way. The authority of the state was beginning to crack not because of one event, but because multiple pressures converged at once. The decisive movement came from the streets. In 1989, peaceful protests grew across East Germany, especially in the city of Leipzig, where Monday demonstrations became a powerful symbol of civic courage. Protesters demanded freedom to travel, free elections, political reform, and an end to state repression. The government faced a choice: crush the movement with violence or retreat. Unlike earlier Cold War crises, Soviet tanks did not arrive to save the ruling party. The demonstrations grew larger, and fear began to change sides. On November 9, 1989, after a confused announcement about new travel rules, crowds gathered at border crossings in Berlin. Overwhelmed guards opened the gates. People climbed onto the wall, crossed freely, embraced strangers, and celebrated through the night. The fall of the Berlin Wall was not a planned ceremony. It was a political collapse unfolding live. After the wall fell, East Germany moved rapidly toward liberalization and reunification. The SED lost its monopoly, political life opened, and in 1990 the GDR held free and fair elections. Many East Germans chose parties that favored quick union with West Germany, hoping for democracy, stability, and economic improvement. But reunification also required international approval because Germany's post-war status still involved the four former Allied powers: the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France. Negotiations between those powers and the two German states produced the final settlement treaty, which replaced the old Potsdam framework and confirmed the borders and status of a future united Germany. On October 3, 1990, East Germany ceased to exist when its 5 re-established states joined the Federal Republic under Article 23 of West Germany's Basic Law. East and West Berlin became one city again. The legacy of East Germany remains complicated. Some former leaders, including Egon Krenz, the last communist leader of the GDR, were later prosecuted for offenses connected to the regime, especially border deaths. The state is remembered for repression, surveillance, and the Berlin Wall, but also for the everyday lives of millions who studied, worked, raised families, and formed memories within it. Reunification brought freedom and democracy, but also painful economic transition, factory closures, unemployment, and a sense among some Eastern Germans that their experiences had been dismissed. East Germany lasted just over 4 decades, from October 1949 to October 1990, yet its impact still shapes German politics, memory, and identity. Its rise and fall reveal a central lesson of the Cold War: a state can build walls, borders, and institutions, but legitimacy cannot be permanently forced. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.